Hey guys, it's Kevin saying here. I had a little thought come into my head that kind of interests me, and it's going to be a rather short video, but it's something I thought was pretty interesting, and my initial thoughts on it. It seems something that's probably understood maybe by a lot of people, but upon thinking about it, I thought it was something I wondered about for a while. I guess never really thought about it, but anyway, so I was thinking about there's this part of the brain that doesn't develop until you're about 30 years old. And among other things, that part of the brain is what allows you to conceptualize future consequences for actions that you're thinking about doing. And this is pretty obvious, as if anybody is the age of 30 or above, let's say, they've probably remember a time in their lives when they were teenagers or younger, or maybe even young adults in their early to mid 20s, rather, where they did certain things that they wouldn't do now, and even on things where the consequences that were possible didn't happen. So you could say, well, it's easy to, in hindsight, always consider and be aware of consequences if they happen, but rather for ones that haven't happened yet, or didn't happen, or maybe haven't happened yet, depending on what it is. So I wondered why is that? Why is it that this part of the brain, what's the psychology behind, the purpose behind that part of the brain not fully developing until you're in your 30s, which is well into adulthood at that point? What is the evolutionary benefit to that? You would think there would be more benefit to knowing that as early on as possible. But when I thought about it, here was my answer to that question, or at least my answer after briefly thinking about that for just a little bit. I would assume that the answer to that question is the reason it doesn't develop until later on is because when you're going up through your early stages of life, mainly pre-adolescent and adolescent as well, there's different stages to your life in terms of your development and stuff. Sigmund Freud did a bunch on this. Isaac Newton had some ideas on it. And so basically, from a broad perspective, from what I understand, is that when you're younger and you're pre-adolescent, you're exploring, constantly doing things. For instance, when you're an infant and such, starting out from the very beginning, infants are constantly taking and licking and always have their tongue out, and they're also taking with their hands, and they're grabbing things and putting them in their mouth, and these different types of things. They're very sensory oriented, and they're exploring the universe that is the new universe around them. Predominantly for threats, but mainly it's just exploration in the earlier stages, it seems. So if you had that consequence stage, especially if there is unknown, so if you're an infant kid, there's a lot you have yet to explore, and unknown would be something that would possibly have a terrible outcome. So if you had that development of possible future outcomes, you would be essentially a paranoid in your shell, and you wouldn't explore properly, and then you wouldn't explore your environment. Therefore you wouldn't know the dangers and lack thereof, and good and bad and evil and such, if you want to think of it that way in terms of your surroundings. And then when you go into your adolescent stage, there begins to be more of a if you're male, it becomes more of a dominant. You're establishing yourself in a dominance hierarchy. Females do the same thing as well, just in a different form. But they're trying to establish the pecking order, if you will. And to do that, you have to push some limits. To do that, you have to sort of buck up against other people if you're a man, and maybe not so physical ways if you're a woman, maybe. But you have to push your limits and push the ceiling to determine where you're at. Because if you're really somewhere along here and you only push until right here, you don't really quite find out where you're supposed to be at. And then once you start reaching that ceiling and pushing above it, you start getting some hit back, and then you can realize or fill out for where you are in the dominance hierarchy. So, and then whenever you're even post-adolescence and early adulthood, you're still your environment is still changing. You're still kind of you're really changing for a lot of that big deal. You're establishing a career, and your environment is everything but static all the way from the beginning until until about your 30s, where things are pretty set in. Your career is pretty well set in. Evolutionarily, you will have had children by that time, and you have a well-established habitat and such. And so that is why that it develops at that point, because at that point you have already, hopefully, explored all of the evils and the goods, and you already have all those things that, had you had that sense of future consequences, that you would not have explored. My thoughts are kind of everywhere a bit because I haven't really thought about this for a lot. So please excuse if I'm bouncing around very much. But these are just kind of my initial thoughts. This YouTube channel is a way for me to kind of organize my thoughts in a very systematic way. And so I hope that it does that, and I hope that maybe it can help a few of you. And if you have any ideas or comments on this thing, or maybe any references to books I could maybe read, I know there's plenty of them out there, but any recommendations in particular, I'd be happy to hear them, and I'd be happy to read them. Again, of course, more videos are coming, and with regards to my story, an email from Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, and hopefully you'll subscribe and you want to hear that story and hear everything that's happened throughout my life. It's been quite incredible, and my father's as well. So until next time, see you later. Give and take.